We're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next part of my show today, and that is my review for The Blackening. This is the latest entry in my saga chat, the saga of my backlog. Backlog. Yes, chat, my backlog. Whoops. Whoops. That was not intentional, by the way. My backlog. Although in a way, this kind of is my backlog. You know, this is a film by a black filmmaker with a predominantly black cast, chat. So in a way, this is part of my backlog. Review's over. It's done. Nothing I say after this is gonna be funnier than that, Chad. Holy shit, that is the very definition of a Freudian slip. I'm gonna take a drink. Give me a second here. This is the latest entry in my saga chat, my backlog saga of checking out films that I missed earlier in the year. I've been doing a pretty good job, Chad. Obviously, I want to watch as much as I possibly can the next, couple weeks before we get to 2024. Everyone starts doing their best of the year, worst of the year for movies and TV shows and video games and everything else in between. And today, addressing my my backlog, if you will, I'm going to be reviewing The Blackening. Chad, for those that don't know about The Blackening, which I take responsibility for, most definitely. It focuses on 7 friends who go away for a weekend retreat and find themselves trapped by a mysterious killer who has a secret vendetta and uses black horror and culture trivia to play a deadly game. Now, I remember seeing trailers and ads for this during the first half of 2020. I believe this came out in like June of 2023. And, I thought it looked okay. There were some bits of the trailer that made me laugh, with other parts that fell a little flat. It's often the case for a lot of comedy trailers. There really is, honestly, so few funny comedies, I think, being made today, it seems. Like, that genre seems to have disappeared from theaters, although there are exceptions, obviously. There was that Jennifer Lawrence movie that came out a little while ago. But so many of those movies seem to be being made for, streaming services, or, we get a lot of comedies and sitcoms on television. I think that's where comedy's kind of, firmly at right now, is on television and these streaming services. Some of the best of it, I should say. Not so much comedies anymore. And, the film itself seemed to find a small audience that really liked it when it was finally released in theaters. And it made a decent amount of cash, I believe. I think it's a relatively low-budget movie. I think it made like a little over maybe 3-4 times its budget, which is, hey, that's a success. It's a nice small success. But I missed seeing it in a theater at the time. For whatever reason. I feel like there were just so many big movies coming out then. It was kind of overwhelming that I just made the choice to see those films over this one. But, I did want to check it out before the end of the year. Now, outside the trailer and really the premise of the movie, which seemed fun enough, I really didn't know anything about the film in terms of who was making it. And I gotta be honest, I was very surprised and honestly very distraught to see that it was directed by Tim Story, who I really dislike as a filmmaker. This is the man that brought us Taxi, Ride Along, the original Fantastic Four movies, the live-action Tom and Jerry film, which I consider to be one of the worst films of 2021 and one of the worst movies of the decade so far. It's like, yes, I've seen Barbershop, and I think it's fine. Nothing about it really stuck with me, but it clearly is well liked by a lot of people, because I think they made like several sequels and possibly several spin-offs as well. So, with all that in mind, whether it be the, mediocre trailers or just Tim Story himself, my expectations going into this film were certainly lowered recently. And I'm glad I didn't go into this with high expectations at all, because I was hearing like very high praise for this, and a lot of people were comparing it favorably to Get Out and Scream. This movie does not reach the heights of those films at all, in my opinion, not in any capacity. It certainly likes to reference, borrow, outright steal from those movies, but it's not those movies. To be positive at the top, the cast does have chemistry with each other. Whether it be Grace Byers or Jermaine Fowler or like Melvin Gregg, they all bounced off each other well. And I bought that these were high school and college friends, reuniting after a decade or so, and they're all in their late 20s and early 30s. The setting is also a classic cabin in the woods scenario, which is always ripe for, fun little scares and little scary situations, right? The biggest issue with the film is that the direction and the script just feels so flat. And I really didn't find it to be that funny a lot of the time. There's a lot of straight up references and dialogue taken from Get Out, the Scream franchise, and other horror films. But unlike, say, Scream, which was ahead of its time for being a very deconstructive horror movie, the way this film does it feels really uninspired and most of the times like very predictable. You can kind of predict exactly what they're going to say before they say it, which kind of makes it feel a little tired and in a lot of cases kind of trite. There were a couple of times that I did laugh while watching this movie, but it was more to do with like a visual gag or a recurring visual gag than like any line of dialogue or any horror movie reference. All the funniest lines in this movie, the funniest bits of dialogue, are indeed in the trailer for this film. It's very much the case where, like for I think a lot of comedy films where it's like, oh, said the trailer's really funny. Hope that's not all the best material and the best jokes in the trailer. I feel like in the case of the jokes, and I feel like in the case of the dialogue, that's what we got with this movie. And certainly its marketing. The third act of the film, I got to say, might be a little confusing to people who have no knowledge of the card game Spades. Does anyone have any knowledge of the card game Spades? Well, believe me, you're going to have to know that. A big reveal involves having knowledge of that game, and even the characters themselves acknowledge it's a game that's seemingly played by, at least according to them, a lot of black people, a lot of black Americans. So I guess a little bit of that is on me. But I did find it confusing. A scene that I would honestly compare it to, and I haven't thought about it in a while, but it would be the poker scenes from the James Bond movie Casino Royale, which focused on like the big poker games. Kind of like the whole point of the movie. It's just James Bond's got to go up against Mads Mikkelsen to get all this money away from him so he doesn't fund terrorism, right? If you don't know poker for those scenes, and I think a lot of those moments, a lot of those scenes can fall flat for people. Matter of fact, I know a person who's actually a big James Bond fan where that is like one of their least favorite James Bond movies because they did not understand any of the poker scenes because they didn't play poker. So I was like, oh. And so I kind of felt that way with this scene. And it was very much the case for me with the scene in the Blackening because it's kind of like a very big, important reveal scene in the film. Just like, I literally don't know what anyone's talking about right now. And everyone's like going, oh, and there's all reactions. All the characters are reacting. I'm like, well, I guess whatever is happening is bad, or it's like it's a big reveal. But again, it's kind of lost on me, to be completely honest. I actually think I got to be really honest about this. I actually think Tim Story has made this movie specifically for black audiences, which is fine. There are going to be references, cultural in nature, that fly over the heads of people who are not black Americans, and so I think that's probably one of the big reasons as to why some of this was confusing or outright just fell really flat for me. He's talking, I think, to a very specific audience, probably in the same way for a film like Barbershop, which he did, God, at this point, like 20 or so years ago. I think this is very much in that same vein. It's not an awful movie, but again, as I always like to say, Chad, comedy is the most subjective of genres. What I find funny, you may not find funny. What you find funny, I may not find funny. And I think this is the case, with me. It's just like, I think a lot of people are loving this movie, and they're liking its references and its references to black culture. And like, oh, they're getting that and they're getting this and everything else in between. But as someone, it's just like, I don't understand some of these things that you're talking about, then I'm like, I get a little lost, honestly. But even outside of that, I just feel like the way in which it incorporated, like, there's a lot of references to Get Out, and a lot of them are like these kind of like obvious references to Get Out or Scream. They bring up Scream. There's a lot of Scream DNA in this movie, and they're just not able to replicate it in the same way that Wes Craven did. Certainly not in the same way that Kevin Williamson did. I'll tell you what, they really did need, I think, like a better screenwriter on this film. They needed someone to punch up this dialogue, to punch up the jokes in this. And whereas I found, yes, the Scream franchise to be funnier, and it was certainly more relevant at the time, like this, not so much. In the end, it's an okay film with a handful of funny moments. Some of the visual gags did work for me, and I do get a sense that the cast was kind of like they were having a good time, with it. But again, Tim Story, I just don't think he's a very good director. I think his direction is very flat. There's nothing really, he's not doing anything interesting or dynamic with the camera at all. And I think the script is pretty lackluster. I think a lot of people are probably liking the movie, but again, what I find funny, you may not find funny, and vice versa. So for me, chat, yeah, the Blackening was a disappointment, and I was actually initially looking forward to it, but hearing who was actually responsible for it, who was the guy behind the camera, I was like, oh no, and sadly my fears became reality. What about you guys? What did you think of the Blackening? A lot of people are saying it's one of the best movies of the year. Other people, I actually don't know, if other people kind of feel the way I do. I mean, I'm pretty curious. I don't know. I just kind of found it to be a pretty mediocre, forgettable comedy. What about you?